All right, welcome to your first set of notes for Rome 2. We're again going to build up Rome. That's the idea. And then we're going to tear it all apart. We're going to talk about some of your ancestors who were barbarians, much like mine, who will end up becoming the rulers of Rome. So this whole unit is more about their culture. It's about their downfall, sure, but it's also about the things that made Rome Rome and like big pop cultural things that everybody seems to know about Rome. So let's go ahead and get this party started. Yeah, I know it's not really a party, but that's what I just said anyway. I should have a video here somewhere. We'll include this link on your classroom so you guys can watch it in its amazingness, especially if it does actually work. Sometimes these don't work. So anyways, Roman culture. So we're going to start with talking about inventions and things that really stand out for Rome. Again, that make Rome Rome. When you say Rome, certain things come to mind. It might be some of these things. So for the first section, it says inventions. One of the things that I put on here is from this time period of the Romans is they actually did have fire engines, which basically equated to a giant cart with a big bucket of water in it, a big thing of water. And then you could use a little pump to pump this stuff out and use it, much like you would a hose for a fire truck. So if you look at the nozzle of it, at the very tip of it, you can see, let me get my pointer here, there we go. That looks kind of like a fire hose nozzle would today and very similar in structure to like a pump or such. So the idea of this is what makes Rome lasting? What are things that we may not particularly use today, but still might be of importance to us in some fashion? And that's going to be it's going to be something like this. Sorry, I was distracted for a second. Something like this. So like aqueducts, this is something we'll get to here in a second, but you notice the architecture of it. The fact that it looks like it's just brick held together in some magical form, and it's still there today, thousands of years later. And it tells us the importance of architecture for the Romans, why they were so good at it. But it's still around today, and we do use things in that function. So the aqueducts were used to carry water across valleys using gravity, made of stone and clay. And it brought water from 57 miles away, and then they were put into public tanks. So if I go back here, you can see that it'll be slanted. It looks slanted because it's the picture. But what you would have is you would have a higher area up, and then you have a lower area down below. And then in some winding fashion, these little aqueducts would be like the gutter on a roof, where it would funnel this water from up high. It would take it down below by way of gravity, because if you didn't know, water itself is self-leveling. So what that means is if it's uneven, it's going to travel whichever direction it's pointed downward at. In this case, it's going to be down like that for aqueducts. So made of stone and clay, the clay would help hold it together as well as pressure involved. And it brought water 57 miles away, put into public tanks. Here's an example of public tanks. Many of these things still stand today, both the public tanks, as you can see these people here up here looking at it, and also those aqueducts still stand. Fans of Assassin's Creed, if I go backwards, you had to build one of these up, and I think Assassin's Creed 2 or 3, and that was pretty cool because you could be in Rome throughout. But let's look at this. So this is a public bath or public tank, where people could come and fill up with water, or they could take a bath in this, where you would pay a small portion or small fee to come in and take a public bath, and it is exactly as it sounds like. And yes, you would be bathing where other people are bathing, so all those things that you're thinking of, yes, probably true, and it would probably get pretty gross like this pretty quickly. But since you didn't have indoor plumbing or really any access to water at all, unless you were near a river or a well, this is what you went to collect water and to take a bath, which I'm sure some of us probably still need to do today. So all roads and money, or roads of money. We talked about this before in your first set of notes that all roads lead to Rome. As they went out and conquered, some of you guys wrote this the other day on your test. As they went out, they started to build these roads. So the idea is that it was built for not just trade or general transportation, but also to get the military around pretty quickly. So as they went from place to place and conquered people and spread the empire, they also built all of these roads. And as it says down here, all roads lead to Rome. And there is Rome. So you can see it's kind of like the spokes on the hub going outward there. So during this time period, we had Pax Romana. If you don't remember from the time of Octavian / Augustus, you had that 200 years of peace. Well, if you're not busy fighting during that 200 years of peace, you can do other things like build roads. And you can build 50,000 miles of roads in this case. Now, roads back then were not roads like we think of today. I mean, you know, similar, but the structure is a little bit different. You can see these are like flattened down stones. Excuse me, my nose is itching. With some clay or whatever in between there. So it's a lot better than going through the mud. It's not perfect. It would be pretty bumpy. If you have wagon wheels or horses, you'd still have to be careful. But a lot of these roads end up being the roads that we have today in modern Europe. They just, well, went over them better, and so cars could go on them. But they didn't have to be huge because it was a person, or it was a horse, or it was a cart. So they were pretty narrow here. As you can see, you had outer walkways for, you know, individuals, and then the middle would be for horses or carriages or whatever else you might have at the time period. On the waterways, their improvement is that they had the Roman Navy. Because as shipping and trade starts to pick up on the seas, you need some kind of protection. So you'd have to keep your shipments away from these dastardly pirates like Captain Crunch, or this Pirate Cat, or the Pittsburgh Pirates. So that's where the Roman Navy comes into play. Now, the Roman army gets a lot of talk, but the Navy doesn't usually too much. But you had to have that in order to keep your shipments safe. You also had a system of currency. No more bartering. Bartering, bad. Currency, good. So now that you have developed Rome, you need to have some kind of currency. And by currency, we mean money in some fashion. And I thought I was going to show you a picture here. But money in some fashion that could be used everywhere in the empire at the same rate. So it's very similar to Europe today because they have the euro. And no matter where you go in Europe, you can spend the money, and it's supposed to be the equivalent of the same thing across the board. So that way you don't have to exchange it as you go from place to place, which is very time consuming, and the value is always the same. So same thing going for the Roman currency is that it could be used everywhere in the empire, no matter where you were. And they also created a system of weights and measurements. Now, that's not so you can get buffed up, that's what we're talking about, but instead it's so that things can be even and fair. If you think about when you trade or when you barter, when you buy things, sometimes it might be wood, it might be food, it might be cloth, something that gets measured in some fashion. And so you want a system of measurement that's even across the board. And for weights, the same thing. For vegetables or fruits or whatever you're weighing, you want some kind of system that is even no matter where you go. So people aren't getting cheated out of their money simply because they're at a place that has a different set of weights and measurements. So, you know, think of what we have today. Our standard yards or feet or pounds, that it's the same everywhere. So people will know exactly what they're buying and how much it's going to cost them. So it allowed for, as I already said, easier trade, easier pricing, and easier shipping so that you could have set rates already in place. Now, we'll also talk about architecture and the arts, because this is important, because it tells us what a culture values. If they don't have arts, they don't have architecture, if they don't have any creativity, sometimes that can be very stifling to a group of people. You know, for example, we talked about how the Spartans were so successful, so strong, but the problem is that they did not allow their people to have a lot of creativity on things, and they suffered because of it, because they didn't improve their culture, because they didn't, I just lost my train of thought. They didn't have culture, didn't have the arts, and the sciences kind of fell apart too, so technologically they were a little bit different. And so what we're going to look at is we'll look at Greek and Roman art and architecture and literature as we go through this. So what you have on the left side is the Greek. Roman side is on the right. And if you look at this, ignore the guy's arm. Some teenager probably jumped on it, broke it off. But your Greek statues and ornamentation were very godlike. They were perfection. Because a lot of times what they drew, what they painted, what they sculpted was their gods and goddesses. So they wanted them to be flawless. So you see this, you know, picture here, the statue here, that this is this flawless person. It's perfect. You know, none of us are really going to look like that. But on the Roman side of things, it was more realistic. And if you look at this girl, other than her dark, vacant little orphan Annie eyes. She's not perfect. Whether it's her spaghetti hair, she does have a longer nose. She does have a chin that hangs down a little bit. No offense to all those, including me, whose chins do that too. But it's not perfect. So they're more realistic versus the perfection of the Greeks compared to the Romans. When we talk about architecture and other things, the Romans very much copied from the Greeks, whereas they use the columns going up and down. You see here on the front, and you have this like almost gate that's going through, very blocky in nature. You might have those old wood blocks as a kid that kind of look like these things. Well, you're still kids, I suppose. And then you look at this, you have columns here again, and even though they're Greek in style, they're still Romanesque because it's very blocky and triangular. So very similar to what you would see at the Supreme Court building, if you've ever been there. A lot of courthouses are designed in the style what you would call Romanesque, which is also much like the Greeks too. So as I said, with the sculptures, they were lifelike with human flaws, unlike the perfect Greek statues. Give you a second to write that one down. I probably should put that with pictures, but oh well. So theirs were lifelike. Greek statues were a little more on the perfect side of things. And then the vault or vaulted ceilings. Now it's not vault like a bank where you're keeping your money, but it says like vaulted ceilings. So think of like a pole vault. Pole vault. You take the pole and you jump really high. You vault up. So in this case, this is what this is here is it's vaulted ceilings or curved ceilings. And it says the Romans built many domed and arched structures. So if they're going to be domed, they're going to be arched. They're going to be rounded up top. So you need to have some kind of thing in place here that's going to support that roof because you don't have 1,000 columns and a big giant beam going up and down. So instead, if you look here in the middle, this upside down V or this wishbone, it's actually holding everything in place. You have these bigger columns down below, and you have this up top where it's coming up in this V and it's holding itself together. And on the outside of the church, you would see what's called a flying buttress. I know it sounds funny, buttress. But the flying buttress is almost this L that extends outward and down onto the roof that sustains the roof itself in the higher levels too. So vault is this higher level ceiling. So in other words, they got a lot fancier. They were able to because of their materials and their construction. Again, they were very good. Here's your aqueduct one more time, same picture you saw before. And how do we know that their architecture is good? Well, they're still standing. These things are still around. You can go visit them. Now, they're not working. They're not using the aqueducts much at all because, well, they have this thing called a pipe and running water that works. But they had their secret weapon was concrete. What we recognize as concrete today. Now, not blacktop. That's a different thing. Asphalt is not concrete. But concrete is like the bags of stuff that you buy from the stores, from Lowe's or Home Depot. And it's mixed. It has ash in it. Ash is like what remains of after you burn wood. Lime. Now we're not talking like the fruit. We're talking like limestone that's crushed, and then water. Once you put water into it, then all that stuff hardens, and you can use it as a patch or as a sidewalk or whatever you really want to. But concrete is going to be that secret building weapon of the Romans. An example of this, of structures that have lasted over time, a good example is the Colosseum, or the Colosseum, as some would say. And there are a variety of ways of spelling it. You note on the note set that it's a little bit different than what it would be in your Quizlet. That's okay. Either one actually is acceptable. So you look in the inside, that's the upper left picture, that it looks like it's a bit run down. Well, you would be too if you were 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old. But this is where they had the gladiator events. And this Colosseum is important because it's quite simply the grandfather of all of our sports stadiums. Think of how sports stadiums are built today. Obviously, they're a bit more fanciful, but their style in which they're built is very similar. The idea that it's rounded inside is so that nobody has a bad seat. Everybody can see, for the most part, no matter where they are. There's no corners to hide people in. There's no posts to hide people behind. This is all well and rounded, and you can host a variety of events in it. Again, you can visit this today. You can see the bottom right picture. There's a lot of people visiting it, but it's seen its better days, seen its way through several wars, and having different groups come in and pillage it. But Colosseum still does stand today. Another example of this is the Pantheon, or Pantheon, as some would say it. Pantheon was this, as I said, almost Supreme Court style building that you had before, where the center, and I wish I had a better picture of it, is circular, like this back area back here. Now, if you played Assassin's Creed, you could actually crawl into the hole in the roof and then drop down and assassinate somebody. Yeah, a whole lot of fun. But anyways, so this style, again, Greek in nature, but is very Romanesque. It's built to honor the gods, and it also has that circular kind of style to it. So again, very angular, very geometrical. Is that a good enough word? Geometrical. And these are two great examples of that. In literature, we won't talk a lot about them in terms of literature like we did the Greeks. Not to say they didn't have literature, but not as renowned as the Greeks are going to be. But you got a famous poet named Virgil and another one named Ovid. Virgil, though, will actually be more famous as a character in a story, which would be Dante's Inferno, in which a guy named Dante, written by Dante Alighieri, who we'll talk about when we get to Italy, brings this Roman writer Virgil into his story to kind of be his guide as he goes through hell and heaven and purgatory looking for his long lost love of Beatrice. So when we focus on the literature, we look more at the genres, is that they wrote satires. Now, satire is very similar to comedies that the Greeks had, but it's a little more sharp. It poked fun at human weaknesses. Good examples of satire would be the Colbert Report, if you've ever seen that. The Daily Show, which I think Colbert is on now, Saturday Night Live, where you take facts, things that are going on today and like news, and you put a little sharp comedic edge to it. So you're still giving the facts, still giving information, but you're putting it more of a witty tone and you poke fun at things, which makes it almost easier for people to follow at times. They also wrote odes. You believe that you have done this or will do this with Mr. Fane. Odes are poems that express strong emotions about life. So if you have something that you love, like perhaps boys with the PS5s or whenever you're going to get that, that you would write a poem about your love for your PS5 and how it is your best friend and things like that. So I looked up odes and I found an ode to a nightingale. Nightingale is a bird. I'm not sure why this guy was writing to a bird, but maybe we'll figure it out. It says, my heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. Well, here's the problem, is A, he had eaten hemlock, or drunk, which was a bit of a poison, and opiates are drugs. So this guy is whacked out of his mind, which would be why he is writing a poem to a nightingale, I suppose. So hopefully that never happens to you or your Xbox or your PS5. So anyways, write your own notes, kids. Now, the big thing that we will talk about, the most important thing, is we will talk about Latin. Now, Latin is going to be their language. Now, Romans didn't speak Roman. They spoke Latin. Latin is going to be their language, and it's a combination of other languages, and it also will go and be influential in other languages as well. It's a Roman language of government, trade, and became a basis of modern languages. You may not speak Roman, but you probably know some Roman words or have heard some. Now, this is what Roman looks like, and you're like, I can't read that at all. I can't either because the way that it's written. Well, you probably know some Roman. Sic semper tyrannis. Tyrannus, you're going tyranny, like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It means king, something along those lines. Now, this is actually a famous quote, yelled by a gentleman who jumped off of a balcony and onto the stage. He said this after he shot the 16th president of the United States, and that was John Wilkes Booth. Not the 16th president, that was Abraham Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth yells to the crowd, sic semper tyrannis, which is thus be to tyrants. So he says that after he shoots Abraham Lincoln. So there's a little bit of a Latin lesson, but an even better Latin lesson is this, ad finem, which means we're done. So there's your note set in 20 minutes or less. So you know a little bit more about the Romans today. Tomorrow, I think we're going to talk about the gladiators as much as we can. All right, have a good day.